Hi, this is NTTS Leadership. I'm Jane King.
And I'm Matt Doherty.
And with us today is Jason Greer. Jason is the founder and CEO of Greer Consulting, a leader in diversity and labor relations. Welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me. It's a
great
pleasure.
to have you.
Jason, how'd you get into this leadership space?
Oh man, that's a great question. By basically seeing a bunch of leaders doing everything wrong. And when I say that, I'm former board agent with the National Labor Relations Board. Made the transition into the world of labor consulting, which basically meant that I had no idea what I was doing. Right? I had this knowledge of law, I had this knowledge of process, but didn't really have a knowledge of business because, look, I'm a social worker by training. But one of the things that I really learned how to do well was to listen. So I would come into these rooms, I would listen to these leaders, and they're talking at high level, but then I watch these leaders going out on the floor basically crapping the bed, but thinking that they did really well because they're high-fiving each other. And they're like, you did great, you did great. I'm like, no, you didn't. And here's why you didn't. And then I would come back with a bunch of information that the employees were sharing with me on the floor.
Yeah.
And so that's when they started calling me the employee whisperer because they're like, you're literally translating what people are saying on the floor to us in ways that we can understand.
In leadership, I talk about the most important thing is you got to know yourself.
Absolutely.
The second thing, you got to know your team. And thirdly, you got to know the truth. You got to mine for the truth. And why does it take a third party like yourself to mine for the truth and then bubble that up to leadership? How can a leader mine for the truth without a third party? I'm not trying to put you out of business.
At the risk of going out of business, right? At the risk of going out of business, here's what
But sometimes it's too late.
Absolutely.
So damaging because they assume that they hit the home run that they delivered, but yet they didn't. That's a big blind spot.
Right. Usually by the time that I come in, it's because there's fires raging everywhere and they have absolutely no idea how to put them out. What I tell leaders is this: if you really want to understand your employees, get out on the floor, roll up your sleeves, and don't just do it once a month. Don't just do it once every other month, because then you're a little self-congratulatory where you feel like, man, I really went out there and I worked hard with them. I'm really tired. And they're looking at you like, dude, you're a joke. We do this every single day. And just because you bring your presence into us maybe once a month, don't feel so good about yourself because we're lying to you when we're smiling with you, right? The reality is what I tell leaders, get on the floor and listen to employees, but also don't just listen to what they're saying. Reflect on how they're saying it. Reflect on what they're saying to each other. And if the moment that you walk on the floor, the employees stop talking, you know you have an issue.
That's really interesting. Well, and one thing you and I have talked before,
Right.
that I really like about your leadership style is it involves a lot of watching and listening.
Yes.
I mean, you don't just come in and you're like, here's how this is going to be done. So how important is that part to leadership for you?
It's so important because leadership is organic. You can I read somewhere where they said there are 10,000 leadership books that are put on the shelves per month. Well, they're all basically saying the same thing. What they're not saying is that leadership in itself evolves every single day. And just because you're good at one company doesn't necessarily mean you're going to be good at another company, because the employee base is far different at that company than it is the new company. So it really comes down to getting involved with the employees. When COVID hit and everything went to virtual everything, I remember thinking, we're going to see a change in the workplace, but I don't know what that change looks like. Because now you have people in their creature comforts, which means their homes. They're no longer engaging directly with you. So now they're going to start creating their own culture. And if you're not present in that culture, you might be losing them and you have no idea that you've lost them.
I love the topic of culture. I say that every organization is made up of the organizational triangle.
Absolutely.
Talent, systems, and culture.
I love that.
And the better your systems, the better your culture, the better your talent will perform, the better talent you'll retain, the better talent you'll attract. However, you can have great systems and great talent. If you have a bad culture, you're not going to be successful.
Exactly.
You got to have average systems, average talent, great culture. You'll be successful. How do you drive as a leader a great culture? It can't just be your core values. I call it wall art.
Right.
On the wall, in the lobby, we got core values. How do you operationalize those core values, especially through large organizations that you deal with?
Yeah, great question. So here's what I'll say about mission vision statements and the values that you put up on the wall. The only people that really matters to are the people who founded the company, because no one else knows it and no one else really cares. And when you talk about driving culture really comes to, I'm a big fan of the movie Remember the Titans, right? And I'll never forget there was a statement that was made that attitude always follows leadership. When you talk about driving culture means it comes from you. When you have a leader that employees trust, you have a leader that employees will walk through walls for. Whether you're giving them constructive feedback or you're giving them praise, they still accept it because they trust you. When you have that type of leader, they will start to embody the culture based on how you show up, right? So it's really important if you're going to bring in a group of leaders, make sure those leaders embody the characteristics of what you're looking for without them being robots of you.
We're talking soft skills.
We are.
A lot of the people you work with probably went to fancy MBA programs.
Yes.
Very few programs teach soft skills.
Correct.
Teach finance, accounting, they teach, marketing. How do you teach leaders soft skills?
I take them on the floor with me. And when I take them on the floor, it's sort of the proverbial hand holding. It's, look, I'm going to introduce you to 20 of your employees and pretend like you know them, right? And pretend like you know them in such a way that you're comfortable in their presence. Because what I often find is you have these executives with many of these fancy MBAs who can tell you about spreadsheets, they can tell you about the latest trends, they can tell you about what it means for the company financially if they go public, but they cannot tell you the names of 5 people that work within their organization. And I'm not saying your line level employees, I'm saying those employees who are down in the ground making your money. So when I talk about soft skills, it's from this approach. I'm gonna teach you how to listen, I'm going to teach you how to talk. I'm going to teach you how to put your phone away and your laptop away and all those things. And then, you ready for this? I'm going to take you out on the floor and I will literally see those leaders. I'm talking kings and queens of industry who will all of a sudden, they'll start to sweat, they'll get red. They're like, you mean we're going out there? And I'm like, it's okay. Come here, I'll hug you. I got you, right? We're going to talk to your employees. Right?
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Well, the new CEO of Starbucks, one of the first things he said is, I am going to every single one of our restaurants and I'm going to make a cappuccino and I'm going to see how this works. And I was like, what a great idea. Because, I mean, not just does it engender some goodwill, but you're also kind of learning how things work on the ground floor, which I think is really important to executive decision making.
I'm so glad you brought up Starbucks because when you consider what's gone on with Starbucks for the past 3 years, they've been unionized across the country, and every single day that you read about Starbucks, it's some new, group of baristas who said, we hate Starbucks. That's contrary to how it was back in the 90s. Yeah. But when you look at how Starbucks was, it's a personality-driven culture, or it had been, because everyone loved Howard Schultz. Howard Schultz was the man. Every time he came to a store, people loved it. But then he retired rich. Then they brought him back, thinking that in some form or fashion that was going to help in order to stave off the unionization. But folks are looking back saying, with all due respect, you're worth billions of dollars and you're a white man who has no idea what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So I think they've learned a lot through those lessons, and it really comes down to, if you're going to be a leader in Starbucks, you have to be a person first.
You just touched on something I want to dive on.
Yes, sir.
Dive into. White man. I'm a 61-year-old white male.
You are?
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
I just dropped the mic. News alert. 61-year-old white male.
Sure.
We're afraid to talk about that
Yes.
publicly. I love the fact that you're African American. We're talking. You talk a lot about biases. We all have them. They drive behavior. They get in the way. How does a 61-year-old white male who owns or runs a company encourage and understand diversity and break down the walls of bias?
That's a great question. First, own the fact that you're white. I think people harp on privilege, on white privilege, way too much, because it's very difficult when you're looking at somebody saying, well, you're privileged because you're white, and that person's like, man, I'm struggling to pay my mortgage, right? I don't feel so privileged these days.
Right.
I think for leaders, how about not just leaders, but people within an organization? When we talk about diversity, it's own the fact that you're white, but also from a diversity standpoint, if you're looking at creating diversity programs or DEI, and I know DEI is under attack these days, stop making white people feel like they're part of the problem and actually bring them into the solution, because the reality is, white folks, unless something has changed in the past 5 minutes, white folks are still the ones who are making the decisions. And part of the reason why so many organizations that happen to be, headed by white folks are kind of putting the pause on diversity programs is because no one has said to them, it's okay to be white.
How have you seen that navigated well in your experience? Who's done that right?
I will definitely say that organizations, actually in the tech industry, believe it or not, and I know that the tech industry catches a lot of grief for their lack of diversity. But when you go inside some of these organizations and you see it like Blizzard, like, Blizzard Activision, or Activision Blizzard, they're doing a fantastic job of it because the reality is they're owning it. And when they make mistakes, they own it. So when I look at creative ways of doing diversity, creative ways of looking at diversity kind of is what we're doing here. Because people are so scared to have these conversations, because the first thing that a white male is going to say, because I've heard it, is, I'm tired of people making me feel guilty for something I haven't done.
Yeah.
I didn't own slaves.
Yeah.
For an African American, it's, man, I'm so tired of talking about diversity. It's driving me crazy, but I have to
Right.
because they want me to. And so you have sort of this diversity fatigue that's happening on both sides, but nobody wants to talk about it.
Yeah.
Right?
So I own a company. I'm charged to hire diversity.
Yes.
The struggle is, okay, I have somebody who's a white male who has a great resume, has great experience, and I have a minority who doesn't have that experience, but I need to create diversity in my workforce, my senior leadership team. How would you advise me to go about that?
You hire the white male with a better experience. I mean, part of the challenge is, it's so funny because I did an interview with the Washington Examiner, and I had no idea that the Washington Examiner, it was going to end up being this debate style, because there was this person who was on who she very much feels that diversity programs are the devil's breath these days, and we should, judge things based on merit. I actually agree with that. We should judge things based on merit, but also understand that we cannot make the assumption that just because you're a white male means that you're more qualified than I am because I'm black.
That's right.
Right? Or Jane is because she's a white female. The reality is you get the best for the position, because I would hate if you hire somebody who's not skilled enough to do the position, because then it becomes you start to drive home that bias.
That's right.
And so I'm an African American man walking around knowing I got 3 degrees, knowing that I'm good at what I do. But the organization's looking at me like I'm an affirmative action hire.
Right.
No, I'm just better than the majority of the people that you're looking at.
What advice would you give to young people just entering the workforce in terms of navigating this new world that we're in? How should they do that?
Look to Gen Xers, right? And I know nobody likes looking at my generation because we're the generation that the invisible generation, right?
Yes.
We do as we're told. There's value in that. Right?
There's value. How about that?
Right.
Repeat what you just said. There's value in
doing what you're told.
How about that?
What I say to
Being coachable.
Being coachable. What I say to millennials, what I say to Gen Z is this. Look, we get that you hate baby boomers, right? For whatever reason. Baby boomers and the younger generation are fighting. We, Generation X, are kind of caught in the middle. And we're just like, I can still pay my mortgage. How about you?
Right.
Right? I'm doing something right.
Yeah.
So the advice that I would give to young folks is there's lessons to be learned in everything. There's lessons to be learned from the 75-year-old man. There's lessons to be learned from the 49-year-old woman. There's lessons to be learned from the 21-year-old person. But if you're going to do a job, do it. There's this big thing out right now called time blindness. And I don't know if you're all familiar with this.
What is that? I've heard it. How does that work exactly?
So
Time blindness.
Time
Yeah,
blindness.
yeah.
Time blindness looks like this. There are people, and they say it's actually a neurological issue, but there are people, especially who have ADD, who have no concept of time. So if they're scheduled to be at work at 8:30, that does not resonate in their brain, so they show up at 9:30 or they show up at 10. But they show up from the perspective that you need to understand that I have this issue, right? But if I'm a leader, I'll buy you an alarm clock.
Yeah.
And I'll make sure that alarm clock's really loud, right? So that it triggers this idea that I need to be at work. But there is something to be learned from principle. There's something to be learned from just doing your job. So my best advice is show up, show out. And if you think you can do better, man, the internet has made everything available so you can learn how to start your own business. You can get out there, hustle, loyalty, respect. I'm a big John Cena fan, right? Get out there and do what you need to do.
We talked about culture. We talked about behaviors, showing up.
Sure.
The toughest thing I've seen with the clients I work with is holding people accountable.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so somebody doesn't show up on time. Okay, or somebody doesn't want to come into the office. They want to work virtually.
Yes.
How, as a leader, do you coach your clients to hold people accountable?
I told one of my clients, because it was actually my client who brought this issue up about time blindness, what do I do? And I said, the best remedy for time blindness is a pink slip, right?
Right.
Because if you can't show up, I love you.
Right.
I would love to work with you, but The reality is COVID changed everything. When I say COVID changed everything, it's not just in terms of the employees, it changed everything in terms of the employers, because the employers recognized, and white collar workers are really going through this. I've hired 10 people making $150,000 a year. COVID taught me that I can actually cut half of those people, keep 5 people, 5 of my best people who I know are loyal, who are going to do the work, and put the work of 10 people on them, right? I keep them at their same salary. So if you have an employee who is not showing up, who's not doing their job, that's putting tremendous stress not just on the organization, but on the employees.
People are going to quit because they have to carry a load for somebody else.
Yes.
And they feel stressed because of that. 100%. If I have to cover for you, no, more likely for Jane, right? If I have to, and then I feel that stress, I'm out.
Yes.
And if you don't recognize that, because now I question you as a leader saying, how come you don't hold her accountable?
Exactly.
And I'm having to do more. Then I question you, and then I decide to look for other jobs. So, that's just old school. I tell young people now, if you could show up on time with a good attitude, that's half the battle.
Yeah.
You're light years ahead of most
Right?
of your peers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jason, thank you so much.
Hey, thank
always
you.
great advice and always interesting to hear your insights.
It's great seeing you. Thank you.
Awesome.
Thank you
Awesome.
both.
Thank you for joining us.
So much fun.